Working It Out, a podcast show about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces, our communities, and our lives. A show where we put diversity and inclusion to work.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out. Dr. V.
On today's episode of Working It Out, we're exploring the personal story of an accomplished professional who has overcome adversity. Achieving excellence in one's field doesn't mean that the journey was without discrimination, bias, or other types of potentially career-halting experience. My guest today will tell us his story, share how he overcame his challenge, and explain how the experience has shaped who he is today. Joining me today is Arthur Dennis Williams, who is known as Dennis Williams. And there is so much that I could tell you about Dennis. But one of the phenomenal achievements of Dennis in his career is that for over 40 years, he has been the musical director of the renowned OJs. And so when you're at a show and you see this big orchestra of musicians supporting that performance, that is Dennis, who not only has a sense and knows how each arrangement should go, but the type of musicians that they need in that audience. And so he has been the musical director and the composer of the OJs. And Dennis, you know, when I first saw you, and I had seen you before, of course, I didn't know you before. I met you through Joseph Coleman, my husband, but I didn't know that you could sing, right?
Well,
Beautifully.
they let me sing a little bit.
Beautifully.
I think I've done some singing in my career.
So give us something. Give us a little bit of something.
Oh no! It's too early in the morning.
Too early in the morning. You haven't had your tea and coffee. Okay. I know I snuck that on you, but you know, it's interesting. You know, people think that because you're a musician, that's always been your educational preparation. But in reality, you have an associate degree in accounting. So you got a left brain, right brain kind of thing going on here.
Well, true. I've always liked numbers. I've always had a head for business dealing. My father was a real estate broker, so that sort of had me, how can I say, locked in for numbers.
Yeah.
But music was my first love. I mean, from the time I was younger, I think I started playing when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My mother played the piano, my father played the trumpet. So it was sort of music and business was in my blood.
So that's part of your DNA.
Unfortunately, well, unfortunately, the fact that my mother died when I was young, well, allowed me to go to the Cathedral Choir School, which is in New York City, and where I studied, you know, regular courses, but I, you know, also studied music under the president of the American Guild of Organists. I went on to study with the vice president of the Guild, Clinton Reed. And look, I've written classical music. I've sung at Eleanor Roosevelt's Requiem Mass. I mean, I was fortunate enough to do many things in my early days.
And in fact, Dennis, one of the stories that you shared was that very early on, you showed an interest in classical music, but maybe you weren't encouraged as much as you thought you should have been.
Well, that's correct. I had a fairly extensive background with classical music when I was at the Cathedral St. John the Divine. And I'd aspired to be a pianist with a symphony orchestra or a philharmonic orchestra, do classical work. But I never saw many people of color doing what I aspired to do. And I didn't get a lot of encouragement as far as trying to encouraged me to go further in the field of classical music.
And what would that encouragement, by not getting that encouragement, was it a message to you about should you pursue that, or was it some other kind
Well,
of situation that caused that?
the I think the lack of encouragement sort of soured me on continuing in the field of classical music. Um, I knew I would continue to be involved in the music industry in some shape, fashion, or form. But at the time, since I spent several years, and I was young enough in starting, um, I spent a number of years developing my craft in classical music, and that's what I aspired to do. Because I wasn't being encouraged, or overlooked in some cases, doing recitals with other gifted musicians, I felt I was as qualified, or in some cases more qualified, but I
Mhm.
wasn't given the same opportunities. So that meant that I would try to get into the industry in another avenue, and it ended up being in R&B music.
Mhm. Well, your bio, you've not only worked 44 years as the musical director of the OJs, but you've also worked with Patty LaBelle, The Temptations, Teddy Pendergrass, who I loved, and Gerald Levert, Stephanie Mills, Joe Coleman, Gene Carn. I mean, you just have worked with a number of renowned performers in your field. And so when you
Yes,
went to
ma'am.
R&B, did you feel like that was a second choice? Because even as I look at you, I don't know if you feel a little remorseful that you went to you took the
Well,
track through R&B, or you felt like that was a good alternative to not going into classical.
well, it was still in the music. It was in the music industry. R&B music at the time that I got involved in it also was still good music. So I didn't feel like uh, it was like a second tier. I wouldn't say that at all. It was just a different. It was just a different avenue of
Okay.
music.
Okay.
Um, I was fortunate enough to be able to work with some of the artists and other artists that you mentioned because of my background, because they were successful and they heard what I could do or saw what I could do, and uh, in some cases encouraged me to come and work with them or do whatever I knew to enhance their careers.
Mhm.
Some of the people you named, like Stephanie Mills, I was involved with her career at a very young age. I mean, from the Wiz, when she first started performing and doing concerts, I put her show together. Uh, Teddy Pendergrass, who was a friend of mine and someone who you admired, when he left Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, I put his act together. I mean, I worked with different people in different phases of their career. So, no, I didn't consider it like the minor leagues of music. No.
Yeah, I was going to tell you, you were in the big leagues. Absolutely. And we've been blessed to enjoy not only the concerts, but the other, like you said, putting their shows together and all the other background work you've done. Dennis, as you know, this particular show, we explore those personal stories. You allow for us to get up close and personal and just kind of understand what adversity has impacted you because of discrimination or because of bias or maybe just because of the industry you're in, and then how you overcame that adversity. So we'd love to hear your story.
Because of the color of my skin, I'm sure that that played a part in being overlooked or not being encouraged to pursue the dream that I had. Um, the fact that the music industry as a whole, I mean, where black artists are always pigeonholed as being R&B artists or never given the same opportunities as white artists in general. That's not to say that's not a unilateral situation. I mean, there are some that have crossed over, but I'm going back 40, 40, 50 years where, you weren't being encouraged to pursue the dreams where whites typically ruled and dominated. Like I mentioned, I wanted to do classical music as a career, and I wasn't afforded the opportunity. I also wanted to write and arrange for symphony orchestras, uh, and I was discouraged from doing that. Although perseverance, forming relationships with people in the industry, allowed me to one day get the opportunity to show what I could do. That's
When
all
you
right.
weren't afforded that
Okay.
opportunity to pursue classical music, because you said that had been a love of yours since you were very young, what was the message
That's correct.
that gave you? How did you translate that?
Well, the translation today would obviously be different than it was when I was a teenager. I mean,
Mhm.
the message was to me that I wasn't good enough. In hindsight, I realized that it wasn't about my being good enough. It was just that I was not wanted to be in that environment. I was not someone that they wanted to see doing what whites typically did.
Mhm.
Uh, it was disappointing because I felt like I was qualified. I knew I was qualified,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it also made me stronger, more determined that I would continue to do what it is that I loved, and at some juncture, maybe I would get to do something in the classical field or with orchestras. And like I said, I've written and co-conducted some music for the OJ's performance with the Columbus, Ohio Symphony Orchestra. I've done it with the Pennsylvania Symphony Orchestra. Um, in Washington, D.C., on I think the July the 4th on 5th or 5th on 4th celebration that they have, I've also worked with the Washington Symphony Orchestra.
So you,
Um,
in many ways, you developed
so
kind of a two-track uh, expertise. You still
approach
pursued
to get
your
there, right?
interest in symphony and also this burgeoning, blossoming R&B career with the likes of the
That's
OJs
correct.
and Patty LaBelle.
The two sort of worked. It worked itself out through the R&B music, and with some of the people that I've worked with. It also allowed me the opportunity to do some things in the classical field on certain shows and on certain events like the ones that I mentioned. So they ended up going hand in hand. So I did get a chance to do some classical music. I didn't get a chance to be Van Cliburn, a pianist protege, but I did get a chance to live out my dream in part through the door of R&B music.
Mhm. Well, when you talk about that experience, it reminds me of experiences that a lot of people of color have had. I often spoke to uh, my parents and parents of my friends who had
Right.
college educations, but the only jobs they could get was in the post office, or
Yeah, that's
or,
true.
or
That's
women
true.
who wanted to be doctors, and they had to settle for being a nurse because that was what was available and what they perceived as accessible. But through your journey, although people seem to put some limits and kind of restrictions on what they thought you should do, you found a way to navigate around that based on what I'm hearing.
Well, again, it was determination is again staying focused on your dream. Being determined is key. Uh, to this day, when you look back, especially in the entertainment field, inclusion into pop music by black artists, I mean, was a hard nut to crack. But if you think about it, I mean, where would pop music be today if not for like Little Richard, Chuck Berry, James Brown. Where would pop music be today without Motown, the Temptations, the Supremes, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye? Issues like that. I mean, people like that. Um, where would pop music be without Sly Stone and Jimi Hendrix? And that's rock and roll. That was definitely the white world. You know, I just always felt at some point, if I kept my nose to the grindstone, if I continued to work at my craft, if I continued to learn, and also encourage other people to do the same, I figured eventually I would be able to live out my initial dream at some point in my life and my career. And I think I've been blessed so far to pretty much do that.
Well, that's part of why this particular show is so important to us, because a lot of times when we have this adversity because of discrimination or bias or limited assumptions that people have, we try to figure out how do we do something different. And you figured out how to continue in the path of your passion, classical as well as R&B. If we think about the arc of our conversations, this is really about the gift you're going to leave with our listeners today. And that's some points of advice around how they should handle that situation when they have a dream or aspiration and somebody want to derail them or point them in a different direction because they think that that's what's going to be acceptable, and maybe in a very loving and caring way, but still is, putting you in a direction that people think is what's possible for you. What's some of the advice you want to share?
Well, first thing I usually tell people is you never know what obstacles will be in your way with whatever field of endeavor that you so choose. Whatever your life is, whatever passion you have that you want to pursue, there may be obstacles, there may be roadblocks. And I just try to tell them you have to sort of disregard that. Be secure in what it is that you want to do. You have to be determined. You have to be focused. I can't stress that enough. You never want to burn bridges anyway, also with people or situations that you might encounter in doing what it is you want to do. Because you never know when you might meet those people again or you might need them again. Make sure you're prepared. If in my case it was music, you try and learn all you can about music. I studied voice, I studied theory, I studied music composition, so that when you do get the opportunity, and they will come. It may take some time, but when you get the opportunity, you're prepared. You're not stumbling and giving the opposition a reason to discount or disqualify you. The one sad thing about all of this is that race, unfortunately, is obviously what causes you to be in the field that you're in with dealing with inclusion or diversity. Because if race was not a factor in people making decisions, we wouldn't be having this discussion in part, because people would be judged on their talent. People would be judged on what they knew, what they could do for you. Martin Luther King made a statement that still lives true today. I mean, white people may not want to see you beaten, murdered, and hung, but they also don't want to see you as their equal. Why equality is such a problem, I really don't know. I mean, I know why, but that's a subject for another discussion. It's just amazing that it is such a big reason for diversity to be.
And to your point, it's really part of the DNA of our culture. I mean, it's one of those unresolved issues that we continue to have to push and fight for. But what struck me, and what has continued to strike me in these conversations that I'm having, is even with that adversity or those limitations that occur because of one's race or gender, it seems to be a motivator. It seems to be like when I listen to your story, it motivated you not only to continue figuring out how to pursue your interest in classical music, but to also take advantage of the R&B direction and be good in both of them.
That's
so
true. I mean, it did.
So as challenging as it is.
It did do that. There are going to be challenges in life, and you just have to keep on keeping on. That's the best way I can tell you.
Yeah, and it's not always about fairness. And as much as we want it to be about fairness and equity, it's about really how do you continue moving to make your brilliance shine.
The browning of America is what scares everybody, and they'll get over it.
They'll get over it. Yeah, it's one of the things that we do in our work in my firm at Alignment Strategies is really get our companies and individuals to understand that diversity is really a business enabler. And to the extent that you could bring more diverse people together, the more successful your organization will be. And the more geniuses we're going to have like you, Dennis Williams, 44 years as musical director of the OJs and creating symphonies and other fabulous productions. But I would love to have you back to tell us some of those OJ stories as well, and some of that Patty LaBelle and some of those other stories. In fact, bring them on so we can have that conversation with them.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope I was informative. And also let me commend you on your career and what you do. It's vital and it's needed, and God bless you.
Thank you so much. So I'm Dr. Vanessa Weaver, your host of Working It Out. Again, thank you to Dennis Williams, musical director of the OJs, and we wish you a safe, productive, and happy week. Goodbye.
Working It Out is brought to you by Alignment Strategies, a management consultancy with more than 3 decades of experience in diversity, equity and inclusion, and organizational development. To learn more, visit alignmentstrategies.com.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out.